They thought the Agojie were a myth. They thought no kingdom would trust its survival to women. But in the red earth of Dahomey, an army rose that would shock Europe, terrify rival kingdoms, and rewrite what power looked like in Africa. This is the story of the woman king of Dahomey and the rise of Africa's deadliest female army. Long before colonial flags pierced West Africa, the kingdom of Dahomey stood as a disciplined, militarized state in what is now modern-day Benin. Its capital, Agojie, was not just a city of mud walls and royal courtyards. It was a war machine. And at the center of that machine stood a ruler who understood something critical about survival. His name was King Gizo. When Gizo took the throne in 1818, Dahomey faced powerful threats. To the east stood the Oyo Empire, long dominant in the region. Internal political struggles weakened unity. Coastal trade, including the brutal Atlantic slave trade, reshaped power balances daily. Gizo knew that traditional warfare would not be enough. He needed loyalty without compromise. He needed soldiers who belonged completely to the throne. But the answer was already inside the palace. For years, Dahomey had maintained a small core of women attached to the royal household. Some were hunters. Some served ceremonial roles. Some guarded the palace grounds. They were disciplined and forbidden from marriage, considered symbolically wives of the king, meaning their allegiance could never be divided. Gizo saw something others overlooked. If these women could guard the palace, they could guard the kingdom. He expanded the core aggressively. Recruitment intensified. Young girls were selected from villages. Some volunteered, seeking status and purpose. Others were offered by families as tribute to the crown. Once inside Agojie's walls, their former lives ended. They became Agojie. Training was relentless. At dawn, they ran barefoot across hardened earth to strengthen endurance. They climbed defensive walls slicked with oil to simulate siege warfare. They practiced close combat with wooden blades until their palms blistered. Discipline was not optional. Mistakes meant punishment. Hesitation meant humiliation. The Agojie were shaped into a professional military unit, not symbolic warriors. They were divided into regiments. Riflewomen trained in musket handling and coordinated firing drills. Reapers carried long machetes designed for close-range devastation. Archers and scouts mastered stealth and reconnaissance. They drilled in formations rarely seen elsewhere in the region. European traders who witnessed their parades described synchronized movements, sharp turns, and expressions devoid of fear. Some wrote that they had never seen women march with such mechanical precision. But the true test came in battle. One of Dahomey's greatest rivals was the Oyo Empire. For years, Dahomey had paid tribute to Oyo. Gizo refused to continue the humiliation. He restructured the army, placing the Agojie not behind male units, but beside them. In several campaigns during the 1820s, the female regiments proved their effectiveness in shock assaults. They advanced rapidly, scaling fortifications and breaching enemy defenses while male soldiers followed to consolidate ground. Their ferocity became legendary. But this ferocity was not madness. It was training. The Agojie were taught to suppress fear. They were conditioned to see themselves as instruments of state power. Their celibacy reinforced loyalty. With no husbands, no children, and no competing family ties, their allegiance flowed directly to the king. This made them politically powerful. They were not just soldiers, they were a pillar of Gizo's authority. And yet, the rise of Dahomey's power existed within a complicated reality. During Gizo's reign, Dahomey remained deeply involved in regional slave trading networks, even as international pressure to end the Atlantic slave trade increased. The kingdom's economy depended heavily on trade, palm oil and enslaved captives alike. The Agojie participated in campaigns that secured territory and prisoners. History here is complex. They defended their homeland fiercely. They also enforced its ambitions. As decades passed, the female core expanded to thousands. By the mid-19th century, Dahomey possessed one of the most organized standing armies in West Africa, and its most disciplined units were women. Foreign observers struggled to process what they saw. European narratives labeled them Amazons, borrowing from Greek mythology because their own frameworks had no place for African women commanding battlefields. But in Dahomey, they needed no mythological comparison. They were Agojie, the king's wives, the protectors of Agojie, the living wall around the throne. When King Gizo died in 1858, the military structure he built did not collapse. It remained. His successors inherited not only a throne, but an army of women trained for absolute loyalty. Then came the storm from Europe. By the late 1800s, France intensified its colonial expansion into West Africa. Unlike earlier coastal traders, these forces came with repeating rifles, artillery, and imperial determination. The Franco-Dahomean Wars erupted in the 1890s. French officers expected resistance. They did not expect disciplined female regiments charging through rifle fire without breaking formation. Battle reports from French commanders described the shock of facing women who advanced despite heavy casualties. The Agojie fought with muskets when distant, machetes when close. They moved in coordinated waves, using terrain as cover. But courage alone cannot defeat industrial firepower. By 1894, Dahomey fell under French colonial control. The kingdom was dismantled. The Agojie were disbanded. Yet something remained. Survivors returned to villages carrying scars and silence. Some refused to abandon military identity until physically forced. Others adapted to civilian life, their past reduced to whispers. Colonial authorities tried to erase the memory of a state where women formed the backbone of military power. But memory does not die easily. In Dahomey, oral histories continued. Elders told stories of women who climbed walls under gunfire, of regiments that swore blood oaths, of loyalty so fierce it unsettled empires. The rise of Africa's deadliest female army was not accidental. It was the result of political calculation, military discipline, strategic innovation. It was born from necessity in a volatile region. And while the kingdom of Dahomey eventually fell, the existence of the Agojie shattered assumptions about gender, warfare, and African statecraft. They were not fantasy. They were not folklore. They were trained soldiers in a structured African kingdom navigating a brutal century of trade, politics, and colonization. History often highlights who conquered. It rarely honors who resisted. But beneath the modern nation of Benin, beneath paved roads and markets, the soil of old Dahomey still carries the echoes of synchronized footsteps. Women marching at dawn, blades sharpened before sunrise. A king who saw potential where others saw limitation. And an army that proved power is not defined by gender, but by discipline, loyalty, and will. If you listen closely, you can still hear them. Not as myth, but as memory.